The Contract in Savannah. Key characters. Samantha Wright. A smart, savvy escort who thought she had seen it all, until she entered into an unexpected marriage with a woman who challenged everything she knew about love and relationships. Elena Carter. A powerful executive bound by the terms of her father's will, who hides her vulnerabilities behind a cool and calculated exterior. She never expected her fake wife to awaken emotions she had long buried. Thomas Carter. Elena's estranged brother, determined to expose their marriage as a fraud to secure the family fortune for himself. Set against the backdrop of Savannah's historic charm, The Contract in Savannah is a tale of unlikely connections, personal growth, and the realization that love can't always be planned. What started as a business deal might just turn into the love story neither of them expected. Samantha Wright wasn't looking for a proposal, especially not one that involved a business deal. But when she crossed paths with Elena Carter, a powerful executive from Savannah, Georgia, everything changed. For years, Elena had been grappling with the conditions of her late father's will. In order to access her family's inheritance, she had to be married before the 10-year anniversary of his death. But Elena wasn't interested in relationships or marriage, let alone with a man. Her father's outdated views never accounted for same-sex marriages, but Georgia law had long since caught up. Now Elena needed a solution. A marriage of convenience to secure the legacy that was rightfully hers. Samantha, an escort by profession, was not someone who had ever considered herself the marrying type. But when Elena made her an offer, 1 year of marriage in exchange for $5 million, Samantha couldn't refuse. It was a business deal, plain and simple. A way out of the financial struggles that had plagued her for years. All she had to do was play the role of a loving wife for 12 months. But as Samantha settled into the new world of Savannah's high society, she quickly realized that playing the part was easier said than done. Elena wasn't just cold and calculating as she'd first appeared. Beneath her hardened exterior was a woman deeply guarded, hiding her vulnerabilities behind a wall of power and control. The arrangement was supposed to be strictly business. There was no need for real emotions to get involved. But the more time they spent together, navigating gala dinners, charity events, and long nights in the same house, the more Samantha started to see the real Elena. And to her surprise, Elena began to open up, revealing parts of herself that no one else had ever seen. Both women found themselves at a crossroads. As the end of the year-long contract loomed, they realized their lives were no longer just intertwined by obligation, but by something deeper. Something that had grown in the quiet moments between them, in the laughter they shared when no one else was watching, and in the way they looked at each other when they thought the other wasn't paying attention. But their carefully constructed arrangement was threatened when Elena's estranged brother, Thomas, returned to Savannah with his own plans to claim the inheritance. Determined to expose the marriage as a sham, Thomas set in motion a series of events that forced both women to confront their feelings for each other. Samantha was used to playing a role, but this time, the stakes were higher than she ever imagined. For Elena, her empire was at risk, but so was her heart. Could they keep up the charade? Or was it time to admit that this marriage of convenience had become something far more real than either of them had planned? As the clock ticked down on the terms of the will, Samantha and Elena faced their biggest challenge yet. Navigating the thin line between love and business, and deciding whether their future would be built on a contract or something far more meaningful. Would they choose to walk away from the marriage, or take a chance on what had blossomed between them? Samantha stood at the base of the grand staircase in Elena's historic mansion, staring up at the portrait of Elena's late father. Thomas Carter Sr. His stern face seemed to judge her as if he could see through the delicate charade she was now part of. The house was as much a symbol of Elena's past as it was of her future. A future that now included Samantha, at least for the next 12 months. "You're up early," came Elena's voice, soft but commanding, as she descended the staircase. Samantha turned to face her, forcing a smile. "Couldn't sleep. The bed's a little too big." Elena raised an eyebrow. "You'll get used to it." There was a brief, awkward silence. Their marriage, as strange as it was, had barely begun, and the unease between them was still palpable. They hadn't lived together before, and now, they were expected to be a convincing couple under the scrutiny of Elena's social circles and nosy family members. "What's on the agenda today?" Samantha asked, hoping to break the tension. "Brunch at the country club," Elena replied, already slipping into her businesslike demeanor. "We'll need to present a united front. My family will be there." "Your brother?" Samantha asked, knowing full well that Thomas was going to be a problem for them both. "Yes," Elena said, her voice tightening. "He's already suspicious. He never believed in this inheritance arrangement, and now that I'm married, he thinks it's a scam." "Exactly. He'll be watching us closely." Samantha took a deep breath, sensing the weight of the situation. Their deal had seemed straightforward when it was first proposed, but now, with the reality of Thomas's scheming, it felt far more complicated. If Thomas could prove that the marriage was a sham, not only would Elena lose the inheritance, but Samantha would walk away with nothing. "I'll be ready," Samantha said, squaring her shoulders. "We'll convince him." Elena studied her, her blue eyes searching for something in Samantha's expression. "You don't have to do this, you know." Samantha's heart skipped a beat. Was that hesitation she heard in Elena's voice? For the first time since they'd made their arrangement, Elena seemed uncertain. "I'm already in," Samantha replied, her voice soft but resolute. "We're in this together." Elena looked away, her gaze falling on the portrait of her father. "Together," she echoed, though the word felt foreign on her lips. Elena had never been good at together. She was used to standing alone, but now, for better or worse, she had a partner, even if that partnership was a contract. At the country club. The country club brunch was everything Samantha had expected. Polished, proper, and full of people with too much money and too much time on their hands. She played her role as the doting wife, staying close to Elena, laughing at the right moments, and making small talk with strangers who barely looked at her. Elena, as usual, exuded grace and control, though there was a tension simmering just beneath the surface. Samantha could feel it. Across the room, Thomas Carter leaned against the bar, his eyes trained on them like a hawk. His presence unnerved Samantha more than she wanted to admit. His smirk told her that he wasn't buying their act, not yet. As the brunch went on, Thomas finally made his move, strolling over to their table with a sly grin. "Elena, Samantha," he greeted, his tone oozing with false warmth. "You two seem to be getting along nicely." "We're doing just fine, Thomas," Elena replied coolly. "What can we do for you?" Thomas chuckled, ignoring Elena's thinly veiled irritation. "Oh, nothing. Just wanted to see how my dear sister's marriage is going. It's all so sudden, don't you think?" He turned his gaze on Samantha. "Tell me, how did you two meet again?" Samantha smiled, rehearsing the story they had agreed on in her head. "We met at an art gallery in Charleston. It was an instant connection." "Instant?" Thomas raised an eyebrow, looking unconvinced. "You must be very lucky then. Elena isn't exactly the relationship type." Samantha's pulse quickened, but she held her ground. Maybe she just hadn't met the right person until now. Thomas's smirk deepened, but before he could say anything more, Elena stepped in, her voice icy. "What's your point, Thomas? You've been hovering all morning." Thomas shrugged. "No point. I'm just looking out for the family, making sure everything is as it seems. You know how much is riding on this marriage after all." Elena's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Samantha could feel the tension radiating from her. But she knew this wasn't the time for a confrontation. Instead, she leaned closer to Elena, resting her hand gently on her arm. A gesture of reassurance and maybe even affection. "Don't worry, Thomas," Samantha said, meeting his gaze with more confidence than she felt. "We're exactly what we seem." For a moment, Thomas studied her, his eyes flickering between her and Elena. Then, with a dismissive wave, he turned and walked away, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. Elena let out a breath she'd been holding, her fingers lightly brushing Samantha's in a gesture of silent thanks. "He's not going to give up," Elena murmured, her voice low. "He's going to try and prove this marriage is a lie." "Then we'll have to be convincing," Samantha replied, her hand still resting on Elena's. "We'll make him believe it." Elena's eyes met hers, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something other than control in her gaze, vulnerability. "I don't know if I can do this," Elena admitted quietly. "Not with him watching our every move." Samantha squeezed her hand. "We'll do it together, Elena. We'll make it work." In that moment, it wasn't just about the money or the contract. For Samantha, and maybe even for Elena, it had started to feel like something more. Something real. The growing connection. Days turned into weeks, and the performance they had initially put on for others slowly began to blur the lines between what was real and what was fake. Samantha found herself drawn to Elena in ways she hadn't expected. Beneath her icy exterior, Elena was smart, driven, and passionate about her work. And when the walls came down, however briefly, Samantha saw a woman who carried the weight of her family's expectations and legacy on her shoulders. A woman who had never allowed herself the vulnerability of love. Elena, for her part, began to rely on Samantha in ways she hadn't anticipated. What had started as a convenient arrangement was becoming a partnership in more ways than one. But neither of them could say it aloud, not yet. Too much was at stake, and both feared what would happen if they acknowledged the truth of their growing feelings. As the end of their one-year contract approached, both women would have to decide. Was this still just a business arrangement? Or had their marriage, built on necessity, turned into something far more real than either of them had ever imagined?